5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, we've had a momentous development this week that affects the lives of every single American and has a profound statement for the meaning of our political system and our political parties. So this is an incredibly important discussion tonight. It's not theoretical. It is down to earth. It hits you right in your pocketbook, right on your kitchen table.
All right, well, why don't we just get right into it, Dad? Tonight we're talking about the Trump tariffs. Can you tell
Correct.
us what that means and the impact that might have to the American economy?
Well, I want to talk about its impact not just to the economy, but to all of us as individuals. Uh, Trump announced his intention. Obviously, he's not president yet, so he can't put it into effect, but he has the power to do it, even without the actions of Congress, as I understand it. I'm not a lawyer, but that's how I understand the law, that he has the power through executive action to impose tariffs. And he has said he is going to impose massive new tariffs, maybe as high as 25% on goods coming in from Canada, Mexico, and China, three of our major trade partners who have a major impact, a dynamic impact on the American economy. Perhaps nothing better illustrates than these tariffs what I have been saying for decades, that you can sum up American politics in one sentence, right, Sam?
Yes,
And what is that?
Democrats have no spine and Republicans have no principles.
Exactly. Tariffs are a prime example of how the Republican Party has no principles, but is simply acting what they feel to be in the best interests of their base and their very wealthy clients within the United States. For 100 years, since the administration of the very conservative president, Calvin Coolidge, Republicans have pledged a commitment to free markets as one of their most supposedly important principles. Uh, Recently, Speaker Mike Johnson, you know him, Sam?
I've heard of him for sure.
Yeah. He listed free markets as one of his most important core conservative principles, saying, quote, government stands as the greatest obstacle to the progress and prosperity of free people. The free enterprise system rewards hard work and self-sacrifice and is the basis and the genius of the American economy. Pretty strong statement, Sam, right? In support of the idea of free markets, that markets should operate free of interference by government, businesses, and individuals within a free market system should rise or fall on their own merit without intervention from government and interference in the market. And they have professed that free markets, free of government interference, are the best way to achieve national prosperity and to achieve prosperity for individual Americans. And of course, in many, many ways, to bolster their political base, to support the interests of their wealthy donors, Republicans have violated this supposed principle in significant ways of free markets, subsidies to business, loan guarantees, special tax breaks, friendly government regulations. But perhaps nothing better illustrates the lack of Republican commitment to this supposed core principle of their ideology than tariffs. Tariffs represent certainly one of the greatest governmental interferences with free markets that it is possible to achieve. They fundamentally distort and change the operation of free markets. Don't just take my word for it. Look at the distinguished economist Alan Blinder. He explains that, quote, protectionist policies save some jobs by jeopardizing others. In other words, distorting the operations of the free market with the hand of government. He goes on to say why. First, protecting one American industry imposes higher costs on others. Again, government intervention distorting the opposition, distorting the operation of free markets, creating both winners and losers. But that's not all. He goes on to say, quote, efforts to protect favored industries from foreign competition may induce reciprocal actions in other countries, thereby limiting American access to foreign markets. Another fundamental interference, in this case with the operation of markets across national boundaries. And if you believe in free markets, they're not limited by national boundaries. This is a fundamental violation of free market principles. It threatens a trade war. China, Mexico, and Canada have already talked about retaliation if Trump goes through with imposing these tariffs. And we know historically, tariffs have devastated the American economy. One of the interventions that prolonged and deepened the Great Depression was the Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1930, which had this distorting effect on the American economy and fundamentally clogged international free market trade on which the American economy is so dependent. We're also being gaslighted with the lie that these foreign countries are going to pay for the tariffs, much like the lie that we're going to build a wall and Mexico is going to pay for it. No way foreign countries pay for tariffs. Who pays for tariffs, Sam?
Everyday people.
Everyday people, because what happens when you impose a tariff is you hike the price of the imported goods to make up for the tariff. So all kinds of things that ordinary Americans are dependent upon, the price is going up. Supposedly, and I have a lot of problems with that, but let's go with it for a moment. Americans voted out the Democratic administration because they were worried about the high price of eggs. Well, independent economists have studied this. Just don't take my word for it. And they have estimated that if the Trump tariffs go through, they are going to raise prices to the degree where the average American household is going to be paying $2,600 more for the goods and services.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
If this is such an obvious mistake and it's going to cause such obvious devastation, why does he want to do it? I don't really get it.
Well, don't ask me to get into the head of Donald Trump and figure out why he does what he does. Remember, he's an American first president. He does not believe in cooperating with our allies. He's got a lot of problems with Mexico, China, and Canada for a host of reasons. And this may be nothing more than retaliation or revenge. Remember, Trump has promised his administration is going to be an administration of retaliation and revenge. I'm, of course, speculating. It's impossible to know, crawl inside Trump's head and know exactly what his motives are, but that's a reasonable one. Another motive is, remember, tariffs do help some industries, and it may well be that wealthy donors from some of those industries are pressing Donald Trump to adopt these tariffs to help their industries. So there are various hypotheses as to why Trump may be doing this, but it's impossible to know without getting inside his head, and that's something I would never, ever try to do.
Yeah, I hear that. It's just something as, as a person like me who's listening to this all the time, just like, wait, why did he's supposed to be this great economic president, but he wants to do the most obviously stupid economic thing possible?
Well, look at the other economic disaster under Donald Trump, not dealing with the COVID-19 epidemic, trying to talk his way out of it. Oh, it's no worse than the flu. It's going to just disappear on its own. We already have it under control. And then, promoting quack remedies like, you know, hydrocortisone. I'm not sure I got it spelled right. Swallowing bleach. Crazy stuff. His own head of his COVID task force, Dr. Deborah Birx, said Trump completely mismanaged the epidemic and perhaps cost hundreds of thousands of American lives. But we know the mismanagement crashed the economy, led to the worst, deepest recession since the Great Depression. So don't presume that Donald Trump knows how to correctly manage the economy,
That's a
as
good point.
opposed to his own gaslighting
I was going to
impulse.
say, yeah. He says he's really good at managing the economy, and he says he's this great business mind, but that's a good point. Maybe, Dad, maybe he isn't. Just saying.
Maybe he isn't. Maybe five bankruptcies might give you some hint of maybe a civil conviction for massive financial fraud, maybe give you some hint about the kind of business person Donald Trump really is.
Right. It is still just
By the way,
amazing.
he doesn't build anything, claims to be this great builder. He makes his money by selling his name.
Right. He just licenses his name on properties for the most
Yeah.
part, at least
So
in
before we
modern
get to the
times.
questions, I want to briefly talk about one other a very important episode. And what is that, Sam? What's happened in the Middle East?
There's been a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon.
It's a great thing, you know. I've been pushing for months, not just for a ceasefire with Hezbollah, which is a more recent conflict, but a ceasefire in the much more destructive war in Gaza. It's a great thing, but I have to tell you, I suspect that Netanyahu held up any serious ceasefire agreement until after the election. Let's not forget who Netanyahu is, which absolutely shocks me why so many Muslims voted for Donald Trump. Netanyahu is the Donald Trump of Israel. He is supported by the American right wing and by Donald Trump. And he desperately wanted Donald Trump to win this election. Look who Donald Trump appointed ambassador to Israel. This guy who says the Palestinian people don't even exist. Netanyahu and Trump are two peas in the same pod. So while I applaud any ceasefire in the Middle East, I do smell a bit of a rat here. I can't prove that, obviously, but it's something to think about.
But on the other hand, the ceasefire happened under the Biden administration, so
Too late. Doesn't matter.
well, it's
Election's
too late
done.
for the election, but Trump can't claim that he solved it because it
Of
happened.
course he will. You know what Trump is going to claim.
But it
That
happened under the
only happened when I won the election. And this was a result of my winning the election. Come on, 100% that's what Trump is going to claim. Moreover, all of these elements, that he's falsely bashing about the economy, the stock market, jobs, unemployment, inflation, he is going to take credit for all of the accomplishments on every one of those fronts of the Biden administration. Look at what's happened with recent presidencies. What did economically Barack Obama inherit
uh
in
2008
2008, 2009?
the
What
financial
was then the
crisis.
worst recession under Republican administration since the Great Depression. What did Joe Biden inherit? The deep recession, the worst recession at that point since the Great Depression under Republican administration, right? What is Donald Trump going to inherit? The booming economy under Democratic President Joe Biden. And he'll take credit for every aspect of the economy that he and his allies have been bashing throughout the election season. This is not speculation. I can assure you this is going to occur. 90% probability.
All
How
right.
many viewers do we have?
1700.
Not bad.
You want
Down
to
a
get
bit. Come on, guys. Sign on.
I don't think it works like that. So because
Oh,
you're
I can't exhort people to come and
no,
watch
because
it.
you're only talking to the people who are already tuned in.
Oh, thank you.
Right.
You're
You
like
can't.
a technical wizard.
Right. You can't communicate with people who are not already watching. So when you said, "Come on, guys,
Oh,
sign on," you just talk to
so
all the
how do we
people.
get more people to come in?
I don't know. Good
You
question.
know, in some ways, what we're talking about now is even more important than what we talked about before the election because this is real stuff that's going to happen.
Yeah. If I had the magic formula to snap my fingers and get viewers, I'd probably be a very, very rich man.
Well, you better get that magic formula.
Oh. Or else what? What are you going to
We
do
need
about it?
viewers to sustain us.
I hear you. What do you want? I got to do everything. I got to do the thumbnail, the editing, the technical side, the hosting side, the question. I can only do so much.
But I got to do all the answers.
That's the easy part.
You think that's easy?
No, no, I do not. All right. You want to get to some questions?
I'm always ready for questions.
Okay. Vincent Thomas says, Alan, do you think by the end of Trump's term, he and the Republicans will remove some of the safeguards put in place by FDR to prevent another depression?
That's a great question. And we haven't had a depression since the 1930s because of those safeguards. And I'm very worried about them. The biggest safeguard is Social Security, National Labor Relations Act, and other welfare and infrastructure programs of the New Deal. I I'm worried. I'm not predicting that he's going to destroy those guardrails, but given the kind of cabinet he's appointed, I'm certainly extremely worried about it. And you're right. We've had recessions. They've been pretty brief, or those that aren't brief have been fairly mild. We've not had a Great Depression yet. And by the way, before the Great Depression of the 1930s, we had a depression every 10 or 20 years in the United States. In fact, the Great Depression of the 1890s was almost as devastating as the Depression of the 1930s.
Member Kashra91 says, what do you make of the UN climate change conference in Baku in relation to Trump's election?
Yeah, Trump isn't going to follow any climate change recommendations. Again, you got to take him at his word. He might not do everything he says, but you got to take him at his word. What did he say he wanted to do on day one as a dictator, Sam?
Drill, drill, drill.
Drill, drill, drill. So he is going to make much worse the crisis of climate change, which is no longer theoretical. It's not a projection. It's here in the hurricanes, the floods, the tornadoes, the bomb cyclones, the wildfires, the droughts. It's here. And it's going to get much, much worse as a result of what Trump is going to do over the next 4 years. Maybe you can explain it because you're so much younger, but I'm baffled why young people who are going to bear the brunt of all this, not old folks like me, why young people aren't up in arms about this.
I've stopped trying to analyze what happened in this election, to be honest with you.
Okay. Should we take a poll?
Sure. Why not? We can do whatever we want. This is our show, Dad.
I'm not sure how to word it, but I'd like our audience who's so loyal here to advise us on how we can boost our audience.
Well, the issue with a poll is that you have to provide the answers.
Oh, all right. Let's think about that. I'm not sure.
How about this? When this video posts online, put in the comments section your thoughts. How about that?
Yeah, we need thoughts because we need an audience to sustain us.
We're almost at 2,000 watching. That's a lot for
That's
live.
good. That's good.
Yeah.
Here's a poll.
Okay.
You may not want to do it, but does a decline in audience have anything to do with the attacks from MAGA people against me? Nah.
Look, I think you're just gonna have to be a little bit patient. We're gonna lose. Like, you were the election prediction guy, right? So leading up to the election, everybody wanted to know what you had to say. The election is over, right? And
Right.
people don't want to hear what the election prediction guy wants to say anymore because the election's over.
But as our 2,000 viewers know, I'm a lot more than the election
I
prediction.
totally agree. I totally
That's
agree.
one little piece. You know,
I
my
I totally agree.
main emphasis is as an historian and an analyst through my 13 books, hundreds of articles.
I totally
That's
agree.
really what I do. The media portrays me, kind of as
Right.
just the prediction guy. That's maybe 10% of what I do.
I totally agree. That was my point, is that in
Yeah.
the mainstream thought paths, people see
Right.
you as the prediction guy. That's what like you said, the mainstream media portrays you as. That's what
Right.
gets you the most attention. So of course you're
Positive
much
and
right.
negative.
And I think you have to understand that too. A lot of political content just takes a dip after the election. It's just the nature
Yeah,
of
MS and CNN have taken huge hits in their viewership, like a 50% drop or more, kind of like, what we're experiencing. But we're going to build up again. I'm confident because we are providing content you won't get anywhere else.
I agree. Yeah, I just give it time. We'll slowly
We'll slowly build back. And I'm really appreciative of our loyal audience that's listening to us right now and asking, of course, excellent questions. Let's go on.
Our next question is from member Sharon Novak. They say, "Is it possible that Trump is bluffing about tariffs so we can predict the increased prices, and when he takes office, he will say we were wrong?"
Very possible. You know, Trump changes his mind, literally from sentence to sentence. But he's been obsessed about tariffs for a very long time. While this could be a brilliant feint, and I won't rule that out, it's a very smart question, I don't think so. But I wouldn't rule it out.
Um, Duluthin says, "Do you suppose that many or most voters base their election choice purely on partisan spite? Would such behavior break the keys, or is it factored in?"
It's factored in. We've had partisan spite forever. Partisanship has always been a very important element of how people vote. That's been factored into the keys and is not something unique that's broken the keys. And remember, I have 4 years. I'm still reevaluating, restudying the keys. And I have help from my very smart son and perhaps my even smarter wife in doing this.
Definitely smarter than me. Um, if you're watching, please throw us a like. We only got 621 likes and we've got almost 2,000 people watching. So throw us a like. If you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe. Our next question is from member Jordan Shepard. They say, "Even though it's still early, are there any names you would like to see put their hat in the ring for 2028?"
Oh, I've been asked that a lot. And, no way you can predict who the nominee is. The most successful Democratic nominees, for the most part, have come out of nowhere. Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. So it may be some absolute surprise person. Uh, I've always been a big fan of Cory Booker, senator from New Jersey, and hopefully that he will again, he didn't catch fire last time, that he will again make a run for it. Uh, I'm not supporting it or not supporting it, but no doubt Kamala Harris will make a run again in 2028. And, I suspect it could well be, I'm not predicting this because it's way too far away. It could be someone we haven't even thought of, as I said, like Carter, Clinton, or Obama, who weren't even in the thought world 4 years before the election.
Could be you, Dad.
And Trump on the Republicans. No, I think, I'm probably, I make the age limit, but
Oh,
I'll be approaching way more than double the age limit, and I think I'll decline.
I can run in 2028.
You can run,
Yeah, I'll be old
I'll
enough.
take a Sherman. If nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve. That was a General Sherman after the Civil War, William Tecumseh Sherman.
Right. Comic Fan says, "What do you think about the arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu by the ICC?"
I think it's warranted. I'm not a legal expert, but you've heard me say for many, many weeks and months what Netanyahu was doing in Gaza is absolutely reprehensible. I am a strong supporter of Israel and have been for 50 plus years, but that doesn't mean I have to support the current administration in Israel. I love America. Doesn't mean I have to support what is going to be the next administration in America. Donald Trump wants to conflate support for Israel with support for Netanyahu, and I reject that.
Patrick Murray, who's been a member for 9 months. Wow, I think
Wow.
Patrick
I
might be.
remember Patrick Murray very well.
He's a good friend of ours.
Yes, he is.
They say, I know you're not a lawyer, but as someone who has served in courts, what advice do you have for someone trying to enter the legal/law world?
Depends how you want to enter it. I presume you want to enter it from as an attorney from law school. And Sam and I actually have talked about this. Number one, if you want to enter the law world, you've got to convince yourself and really have an internal dialogue that you really want to practice law, that you're not going to use a law degree for something else. I think that's a big mistake. Two, you need to think very carefully about what kind of law you want to practice. Civil law and criminal law, for example, are totally different. Real estate law is totally different from international law. I could go on and on. So, it's not like one law degree fits all. You need to think about what it is you want to specialize in, and then what is the best fit for you in law school and what law school you can realistically get into and afford to pay for. Law school is incredibly expensive, as we learned, Sam.
Yeah, people are not my. I don't think I've ever said this on the live before, but I went to law school for 1 week and I dropped out. So,
The weekend at the college didn't turn out as you planned, like the old song, huh?
like the old song. Our next question is Trump's DOJ will investigate the 2020 election to see if there was any, quote, fraud. Do you think the DOJ will purposely lie and muck things up to say 2020 was rigged?
They might. Wouldn't shock me. Look, nothing Trump and his allies do shocks me anymore. And this is a guy who got away with inciting an insurrection, pressuring election officials to change the election results, setting up slates of fake electors, stealing our national secrets and storing them in completely unsecured locations, and got away with it all. And so nothing that Trump or his cronies do would surprise me anymore.
Private CM wants to know what was your experience with the Vietnam draft?
I was 4F. I was not a conscientious objector. I would have gone. I don't know if they would have sent me to Vietnam or, not everyone who was drafted necessarily went to Vietnam, although most of my friends did. So I would have gone. I would have served because I wasn't a genuine conscientious objector, but I was 4F, medical.
Christophe Lirola says from 2021 to mid 2023, real wage growth, wages adjusted for inflation, was negative. Could that have affected the economic keys in this election? Inflation outpaced wage growth and GDP.
I'm not sure that's entirely true through to 2024. I've seen various statistics on that, so I don't think so. From what I've seen, if you take it through 2024, real wages have outpaced inflation, but obviously not in those very early years when inflation was 9%. And here's what baffles me. Yeah, if this was all due to inflation, which I thought, it's way too simplistic. Inflation was way worse, multiple times worse in 2022, when the Democrats did way better than expected, and virtually every Trump endorsed candidate got wiped out. So, how do you explain that as compared to what happened this time and attribute it to inflation. As I've tried to explain, there's much, much more involved, and I'm continuing uh, over the next months and years to reevaluate it. But that's way too simplistic an explanation. Just doesn't hold when you look at 2022.
Right. Um, President Belichick, one of our many presidents in the chat, they say, this is more of a statement. They say the inverted yield curve does not bode well for Trump's second presidency.
Yeah, that's an inflation indicator. Uh, I don't know where it stands at the moment, but this was President Belichick,
Yeah.
one of our longest and most loyal followers. So I haven't checked that myself, but I don't doubt what you say. But I know it's not always accurate either.
Member Gail Cracker says a data scientist saw 600,000 votes for Trump in the 7 swing states with 0 down ballot votes. He says this is a statistical impossibility. Professor Lichtman, do you see the possibility of election fraud with this assessment?
I haven't seen it. That sounds a little bit far-fetched to me, but it's possible because there very often is a fall off. It's called a fall off or a roll off between the vote at the very top of the ticket for president and the vote for down ballot candidates. So while I haven't seen that evidence, uh, I can't comment on whether it's indicative of voter fraud or not. I do know that and I don't necessarily, put my faith in them, but that officials of the Biden administration who look at these things like their cybersecurity operation have not found any significant evidence of voter fraud. I found a lot of anomalies, and I pointed a bunch of them out to you, including the very sharp decline in the Biden vote as compared to the Harris vote, which I find a real significant anomaly as well as many others, but I'm not a technician and I'm not an investigator of voter fraud.
Pegs says Trump and Cleveland in 1892 were both former presidents with net positive retrospective approval ratings of their first administration, and both won their re-elections to non-consecutive terms. Should you add a key for this?
I have to think about that. It's only coming into 2024 was only one example. At a very different system. This was the aftermath of the Reconstruction when Democrats, white supremacist Democrats, took over the South, and a Democrat like Cleveland was able to pile up wins in every one of the former Confederate states. So that whole period was tainted by what's called the redemption, a terrible word, the takeover of the Reconstruction governments by white supremacists. So, I'm very loath to draw a comparison. Plus, if you look at Trump's approval rating throughout the election, it was very low, never hit 50%, typically was about 43%, and lower, and we've almost never seen this, lower than his defeated candidate. I think only once in the last 17 elections has a candidate with a lower approval rating won the election, or conversely, a candidate with a higher approval rating lost the election.
Our good friend
So
Miles.
it's a smart comment. Absolutely. There's so many of them.
You done?
I'm never done, but I'm pausing.
Right. What are you drinking tonight?
You don't want to know.
I mean, I know it's a cola, but I'm just curious. What is it? Diet Coke? What is it? Let's
Diet
see.
Coke.
Let's see it.
Why? Then I'll have everyone rag on me.
Ah, Diet Coke.
Ah,
All right.
keeps me going, and it's late. I need the caffeine rush,
True.
and I don't drink coffee.
Good point. Our good friend Miles Wolf says, do you think Trump will take credit from Biden achieving foreign policy keys in Ukraine and Israel?
100%. He is going to take credit for every accomplishment of the Biden administration. That's as I said, a 90% guarantee. Take credit for the economy, take credit for the ceasefire in the Middle East, take credit for everything that Biden has done, no doubt. And that's partly the fault of the Democrats. What have I said about the Democrats beside their being spineless? What's their other huge deficiency?
Messaging.
Messaging. Nobody knows what Biden has done. So seamlessly, Trump can take credit for all of it.
Good point. CD says to answer that question that Sam had about why Trump is doing this, the tariffs, even though it seems like a bad idea, they say one of the many reasons is the billionaire class roots for and capitalizes off economic bad times. That's not a bad point, I guess, right?
I
To
guess,
some
although
degree.
not necessarily true, they're most profitable during good times. And that depends upon which business you're in. But I did make a similar point that this may well be a result of lobbying by those business interests. Remember, some benefit, some don't.
Right.
Those business interests who benefit from tariffs, protecting them from foreign competition.
Good point. Ollie says Scott Bessent said tariffs can't be inflationary because higher prices in some things means you have less money for other things. Do you agree?
I don't really
I don't
understand
understand that either.
that one. Higher prices are higher prices. If you're paying higher prices, that means you have less money for other things.
Let's see.
If I have to
Tariffs can't be
double the cost of my groceries, I'll have less money to go to the movies.
right. I don't get that either.
How many viewers now?
2,400.
All right, that's pretty good.
You happy now?
Well,
Are you happy now?
uh, hey, at my age, yes. You know why I'm happy?
Why?
Because we have so many really smart viewers, because I have a son who's like a genius and a wife who is a genius and is Wonder Woman, number 46 in the world in her division in the international CrossFit competition, and an Ironman triathlete and a winner in her division, 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, and a 26.2-mile run. How many people can say they have a wife like that?
Pretty good.
None.
Colored Duck says, how realistic is it that Trump cuts the Department of Education? Is it more likely that he would cut funding for it? What domino effect would closing it cause?
Yeah, I mean, closing it would have a devastating effect in education because, financial aid, uh, help with programs, development of institutions is so important in the Department of Education. Uh, it would be very hard for him to abolish it. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I think it would require an act of Congress. And it looks like he is going to have as razor thin a margin in the House as they had in the previous Congress. You virtually have to have every Republican behind the passage of a law. And I'm not sure, they can't afford more than 3 or 4 defections. I'm not sure they could get every Republican in line for something that radical.
In your face New Yorker. Dad, you're an in your face New Yorker, kind of.
You bet. Although I haven't lived in New York since I was 16, but
Oh,
hey, once a New Yorker, always a New Yorker. Because look how I'm lamenting all my New York teams, the
right.
Jets, the Giants, the Yankees. I guess we have the Knicks though. They're doing well.
Well, I mean, the Yankees were in the World Series. I mean, come
I
on.
know, I know, but it was still so disappointing to lose in such a devastating way. It left a bad taste. And, you know, first World Series in like 15 years and they blow it. I think there were huge management problems in all of those organizations.
But you don't even like the Jets. Why do you care about the Jets?
I don't. I don't.
Okay.
And I certainly
Anyways,
like Aaron Rodgers.
right. Anyways, in your face New York.
Anyway, let's get off my sports obsession.
Let me finish. In your face New Yorker says, Will Trump really be able to jail his enemies like Nancy Pelosi and Anthony Fauci?
Conceivably, he's not going to be able to jail them through normal legal processes. You know, if they're indicted, they're not going to be convicted because they haven't done any crimes. You know, Trump claims, oh, the Justice Department has been weaponized against me. No, those are things you did. They had nothing to do with the Justice Department being weaponized. In fact, just the opposite was true of the Justice Department under Biden. His pick for Attorney General, Merrick Garland, bent himself into a pretzel not to go after Donald Trump. Uh, Deflecting for almost 2 years before appointing a special counsel, Jack Smith. So, like so much else, the exact opposite of what Trump is saying is true. So, I don't think he'll be able to jail them through normal processes, but just being charged and having to go to trial is traumatic enough, even if you're not convicted. But remember now, Trump is protected by presidential immunity, and he could jail them without the due process of law by just using his executive powers, declaring some kind of an emergency. I'm not saying that would hold up in court, but who knows? And it might take a very long time to free them.
Member Alex Kawa says, should Biden resign so Harris can take over, and then she would refuse to leave office on January 20th, claiming it as part of her official duties?
I'm not going to be complicit in subverting the Constitution. But remember, when spineless Democrats were openly and viciously trashing their elected president and elected nominee, I had a plan B. Do you remember that plan B, Sam?
Yes, I do. It was Biden resigns, and then they retain the incumbency
Incumbency
key
key
and the
and the
primary
contest
contest
key.
key. Yeah.
That was my plan B, but they were too spineless to put it into effect. I think it would have changed everything. I can't prove it, can't prove, what might have happened if something was different, but it certainly would have improved things greatly for the Democrats. And Trump did not win in a landslide. He didn't even get 50% of the popular vote. And, some of those swing states were just a point, two or three, which easily could have, swung the other way.
He did. I think right now, I just looked it up. He is exactly at 50% of the vote.
Wow. Last I saw it was 49 something, but we'll
Right.
see when it's finally. But even if he's right at 50, that's not exactly a resounding mandate. His whatever his lead is, it's going to be far less than the lead that Biden had over him, which was about 4 points in 2020. And Trump, certainly wasn't saying Biden won a mandate, was saying Biden didn't win at all.
Well, yeah. Yeah. According to the Associated Press right now, Harris has 48.4% of the vote, and Trump has exactly 50%.
Yeah, that's about what they were predicting, about a 1.5 point difference, way less than the close to 4 point difference that Biden had, and even less than, I think it was like a 2.8% difference Clinton had even when she lost the Electoral College. So there's no booming mandate here, but that won't matter. Trump will claim it anyway, and at least half of Americans will believe him. That's why, I stress this my very first thing about repairing our democracy, instant fact checking, because I never blame the voters. The voters are not fact checkers. They need help.
Well, that's a video that we recorded before this that we're going to post as a standalone later. People don't know that
Oh,
you did
right.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
True point.
true point.
Glad you correct me on my dim grasp of technology. That wasn't live what I
That
recorded.
was not live, no. So stay tuned. There's a video coming out in the next few days
It's
about
very
that.
exciting because it does talk about real specific measures to protect our democracy, not just throwing up our hands and letting it go.
People are saying that the AP 50% is rounded up from 49.97% now.
Ah, okay. So it's not 50.
Well,
Our audience is so darn smart. I really learn a lot from them. How many do we have now?
still 2,400.
Excellent. So they're hanging in there.
Hang
That's
in
not
there,
far
folks.
off from what we had last week. I think it was 3,300.
We had 3,300 people last week. Are you sure?
I don't know. I'm not sure. That's just from memory and never trust an old guy's memory.
Right. Ziggy C says, how do you feel about George Friedman's observations regarding the U.S. every 50-year political crisis? Do you know anything
Yeah,
about that?
I think those are, phony. I've seen so many of these cyclical theories, and basically they're pounding a square peg into a round hole. I don't buy that at all.
80 Mart says, best thing about your channel, aside from the model, is the analysis of current events from a historical perspective. Thanks for what you guys do. See that? People like what you
That's
do
what we're
beyond the
trying to
keys.
do. That's what we're uniquely, I've tried not to listen to much news, but you listen to the news and it's all the same blather with no historical perspective, no depth, nothing unique. Uh, Same old, same old. No wonder their audiences are dropping off.
Druv Kaushal says the GOP will probably pass another tax cut for the very wealthy, which obviously doesn't help the working class. I wish Democrats would run more on this topic.
There are so many things in terms of messaging that the Democrats are deficient about. And I have to agree uh, with our audience person about that. Democrats it's not the policies that are wrong. Uh, it's the total lack of a simple, compelling message. As I said, Donald Trump's going to take credit for all the Biden policies.
Yep. And I don't know. Yeah, we never mind. Um, Krajimir Boyanov says, Professor, how do you think the wars are escalating the climate crisis?
Wars always escalate the climate crisis. Wars leave huge carbon footprints. They say an army uh, exists on its stomach. Well, armies exist on fossil fuels.
Yeah, no doubt. Um, Member Bonnie Stuff says, does history tell us how far we have to fall before we can reestablish our democracy?
There's no concrete answer to that, but history does suggest, and not just US history, but history around the world, that once a democracy is lost, it is very, very difficult to reclaim it. And there's no exact answer to how far it has to fall, but what you need to look at is whether our fundamental constitutional imperatives are being destroyed, such as uh, due process of law, such as opportunities to vote free of interference, fair and secure elections. Those are some of the things you need to look at.
Taylor Foote says, how can you argue Trump didn't take the charisma key? We saw him fight after getting shot and being persecuted, and he won.
Everyone's a genius after the fact, right?
Right.
Oh, you should have given Trump the charisma key because he won. If a few votes had shifted in a few swing states and he lost, you would say, you're right. You should not give him the charisma key. Based on the evidence I had at the time and even evidence now, no way Trump won the charisma key. Remember, the definition of the key is you have to be one of those once in a generation, broadly across the board appealing candidates like Franklin Roosevelt on the Democratic side and Ronald Reagan on the Republican side, who won 6 elections by landslides. In previous 2 elections, again, we don't have the results of this, but it doesn't look like he's going to break 50. But just look at the 2 elections we had at the time. Remember, you make predictions not after the fact, but before the fact. He lost the vote of the people by 10 million votes. In 4 years as president, his approval rating in the Gallup poll averaged 41%, right at the bottom historically of all presidents. Even during the campaign, his approval rating was below that of his Democratic opponent, Harris, and down in the low to mid 40% range. So it's not close. He didn't fit the criteria of the key. And then to say after the fact, oh, he won, and that means he won the charisma key, that's meaningless. You don't know that he won because of the charisma key. And in fact, even after the election, we've seen something we've never seen before. In the immediate aftermath of the election, Donald Trump was still underwater and still had a bigger gap between approval and disapproval than the candidate he defeated.
Sean Breen says, I believe ADL Stevenson said in 1952 that the Democratic Party had strangely become a conservative party defending previous gains. How might that sentiment reflect today's reality?
No question, back in the 50s, they were basically defending the legacy of the New Deal, which was the greatest example of policy change in the history of the country. The sitting president, Harry Truman, had tried to expand on the New Deal with his so-called Fair Deal, which included, by the way, comprehensive uh, medical care reform, but the conservative coalition of Republicans and Southern Democrats basically defeated what he had done. Very different now. Again, people don't know what Biden did, but he has, and I've gone over this many times, the greatest uh, achievement of domestic accomplishments of any president since the 1960s. And as I tell you, Republicans have taken credit already for bills like the infrastructure bill, the stimulus bill, passed under Biden that they were opposed to, and Trump will take credit for all of these initiatives.
Here's something that I think we've asked before, but I can't remember what your answer was, and I'm sort of interested in it. So Will Strutchermeyer says, for the short-term economy key, your book literally says on page 32 that the keys depends primarily on whether there is widespread perception of economic mired in recession during the election campaign. How can you say that during streams that it doesn't turn on perception when your book says it does?
You got to read the whole book. I've made it crystal clear it turns on two things. One, an actual recession identified by the National Bureau of Economic Research, and two, overwhelming 75 to 80% perception that there is a recession. That's why I called the recession key against the Republicans in the presidential election of 1992. I've never called the key just based on polls. Moreover, at the time that I called the key, 48% of Americans thought we were in a recession, only a minority, nowhere close to the 75 to 80%.
All right, we're going to get to one of our Discord questions of the night.
All right.
If you want to join our Discord or our Reddit, the link to those are in the description of this video. Our first Discord question is from Serena. They say, something that was discussed in the server a few days ago was John F. Kennedy getting the charisma key in 1960. I'm curious about this given that JFK got 5% of Republicans, but Nixon got 16% of Democrats. Kennedy also lost independent voters to Nixon by 14 points, all in an election with very close popular vote results. So I'm curious as to how JFK got the charisma key. Was it his time in the Navy that made the difference here, or was there something else that I'm missing?
Look, everyone's a genius after the fact. Everything you presented to me is after the fact analysis. I haven't reviewed the 1960 election in 40 years, so I don't know if those numbers are right or not. I don't see how Kennedy could have won the popular vote when losing all of that across the board. But leave that aside. That's all post hoc analysis, which cannot figure in any prediction. Good friend of mine, a great journalist who was a classmate of mine at Brandeis, said, We made a presentation many years ago, said, unlike Lichtman, I am really good at predicting elections where I know the outcome. Uh, it was not strictly his service in the war. It was the way in which he presented himself to the American people as someone who was unknown, who was very lightly regarded, who was considered way overshadowed by the vastly better regarded, more experienced Nixon, who had been vice president for 8 years. And it was Kennedy's charisma, broadly recognized at the time, that enabled him to overcome all of that. And the close popular vote, as I proved in my book, The Rise of the American Conservative Movement, to a great extent reflected the fact that he was only the second Catholic ever to run for president, and that cost him very large numbers of Protestant votes.
Right, and couldn't you argue that maybe if he wasn't as charismatic as he was, he would have gotten 2% of Republican votes rather than 5% or something, you know?
Yeah, I don't know if any of those numbers are right, but yeah, he would have gotten, in my view, many fewer votes and would have lost the election.
Uh, Leah Danley says, what does history tell us would be the most important things for the Biden administration to do before they leave office?
This is a very interesting question. Most important thing is to confirm every judge that's pending, so you don't leave vacancies for Donald Trump to fulfill once he becomes president. Another thing that's been floated, I'm not advocating it, but it would be something bold for Democrats who never do anything bold. What is that, Sam? What have we talked about Biden using his power to do?
Um,
Pardon.
oh, yeah.
Pardon the leadership of the House and the Senate and other figures that Trump has threatened to prosecute. Trump used his pardon power liberally to pardon his cronies who were actually convicted of crimes. It would be quite a bold move for Biden to use his pardon power to protect those who've done nothing wrong, weren't convicted of anything. There are no charges conceivable legitimately against them. Why not protect them with the pardon power? I'm not advocating it, but I'm saying it would be a bold move for a party who never does anything bold. Spineless Democrats.
Ben Weinberg wants to know, will the Trump tariffs cause a recession?
Whether Trump what?
Will the Trump tariffs cause a
Cause a
recession?
recession? Conceivably. I mean, it's very hard to predict the economy. Even, the most eminent economists with their huge econometric models can't even predict the economy from one quarter to the next, even from one month to the next. Every month you hear, when they have the jobs report, oh, jobs greatly exceeded expectations, or jobs greatly fell below expectations. Translated, that means the big models that create those expectations are wrong, are inaccurate. So I'm loath to predict, because so many factors affect the economy, whether tariffs alone would drive us into recession. But I'm more confident in predicting that if implemented and a trade war occurred, they would raise prices.
Marcellus Wallace says, why do college educated voters lean more Democrat? Tick.
That's a very difficult question. And I would say they're more likely to cut through the disinformation. You've heard me talk about disinformation. I know Sam doesn't like me talking about that, but it's real. I talked about the book, The Spin Doctors, and I would encourage everyone to read that. And I've quoted from it, and I'll paraphrase that modern authoritarians take power not by force, not by conquest, but by controlling the flow of information. And today, and don't take my word for it, there are now new studies on this. The flow of information is very one way, very much supporting what Donald Trump and his cronies and Elon Musk has to say, and I think college educated people are cutting through that. Not that non-college educated people are not capable of cutting through it as well. They absolutely are. But, there's a small difference between them. And there may be many other factors that explain it, including where people live and who they're in contact with. But I do think it's really important for all of us to think about how to deal with information. That's why uh, I've talked a lot about ways to combat disinformation.
All right, we have hit an hour. How many more questions do you want, Dad?
Three more.
Three more.
How many viewers have stayed with us?
We're at 2,200 viewers.
Oh, nice. So I'll
Thank.
do four more because we
Oh,
have so many.
holy cow. Brent,
Straining this old body, but I'll do it.
thank you, Brendan Fleming, for the kind words. He said they saw you on Pierce Morgan. He thought Piers was totally disrespectful. He says thank you for your intelligent insight. So that's
Thank you.
nice.
I've been really dismayed by the fact, that so much of the criticism, there could be legitimate criticism, particularly from this guy Jenk, is nothing more than hurling middle school insults, middle school name calling, as though that has anything to do with what we're dealing with. I've been doing this for 42 years. I've answered tens of thousands of legitimate questions, but it is a crying shame how far our discourse has sunk.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
thank you for the comment. I appreciate it.
yeah. Andrew Carlson says, Professor, should we be concerned about Bible teaching in public schools under the new Texas law? Could this
Absolutely, we should be concerned because, one of the hallmarks of American democracy is we are independent of religion. We have no established religion, no religious test. Church and state should be separate. And to the extent we are uh, prioritizing and privileging through government a particular religion, I think is very, very dangerous. I also have a new book coming out on an update of my 2008 book on the American conservative movement, in which I point out that the kinds of teachings that conservatives make of the Bible are incredibly narrow, cramped, and distorting. That they focus on things that are barely in the Bible, like transgender or abortion or homosexuality, and ignoring the great thrust of the teachings of both the New and the Old Testament, which is a mistrust of greed, concern for the sojourner, concern for the poor, uh, and fidelity to the truth. That's the main thrust of biblical teaching. But I guarantee you, that's not what they're going to be teaching in Texas.
Victor Hlone says, is it worth considering that the majority of Americans simply lost faith in their government system altogether, and for this reason the keys didn't work this time? The electorate.
Yeah, that's a very smart comment. That's certainly worthy of consideration. It's very hard to pinpoint that, but it's certainly something I'll be thinking about over the next several months and years as I go into an in-depth evaluation. Thank you for the insight.
All right, final question of the night is from. This is more of a comment question from Gabriela Siegrist. They say, Dr. Lichtman, I'm Mexican but American at heart. I've been feeling very down since Harris lost. I need some words of hope.
Our democracy has been in peril before. I've warned about the dangers of our democracy, but I've also laid out, and check out my book, 13 Cracks. I think I have it here. Here it is. Can you see it?
Yes.
13 Cracks Repairing American Democracy After Trump, where I point out all the ways in which we can strengthen our democracy and protect it from those who are authoritarian minded. But in the end, it all depends on you. It all depends on ordinary people resisting voting against, protesting against, organizing against any attempt to subvert a democracy that's been functioning for over 220 years.
Okay, with that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live. Do you know what the good news is, Dad?
What's the good news?
The good news is the Lichtman Live post show comes up right after this. The link to that is in the description of this video, and I will also pin it to the chat. All right, Dad. The Trump tariff episode. What's your final word to the people?
Don't despair. Stay tuned to our channel. We will continue to give you straight from the shoulder analysis of what's going on with historical depth and as much insight as we can provide. And I want to thank our audience for excellent, provocative, and tough questions.
Yes, thank you all very much for tuning in. We truly appreciate it. See you all on the Lichtman Live post show. Say goodnight, Dad.
Good night, all.